Hey, Crystal, welcome to Rich State of Mind. If you could please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, so thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. So, my name is Crystal Young. I am a real estate attorney. I've been in the real estate field for about 20 years now, starting as a paralegal. And I worked about 10 years as a paralegal before I decided to go to law school.
Mhm.
As a paralegal, I was doing all the attorney's work. And I said, you know what? It's time to go to law school. And I went to law school, came out, and decided to represent buyers and sellers in real estate transactions.
And so, what made you go into the real estate realm, vice any other branch when it comes to being an attorney?
Yeah. So as a paralegal, I actually fell into working at a law firm that handled real estate transactions, but we actually handled real estate transactions on the other end. We represented big banks as they were foreclosing on people's homes. So I represented all of the big banks during the mortgage crisis,
Oh yeah.
actually. Yeah. And so we were, it was a very busy law firm, and I was just on the other end of what I'm on now. Now I'm representing clients, when they purchase, when they sell their homes. They're usually not in foreclosure. At that time, I was, terrible stories of, clients that were going through foreclosure and that were losing their homes. So that's actually what made me want to go to law school and now represent clients on the other end, because again, I was representing banks, and it was heartbreaking to see what was happening during the mortgage crisis.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I know at the end of the day, a bank or any business that's trying to stay afloat. Hey, look, it's just business, and the humane side of it sometimes, or a lot of times, gets taken out of the picture. And so yeah, you're displacing a lot of families. So I can understand why you wanted to switch over. What would you say you learned being in that on that side of the business though, when it came to representing the banks?
Yeah. So what I learned being on that side of the transaction is, when you are seeking to purchase a home, you don't want to overextend yourself, because that happened a lot. You want to make sure that you're planning for a rainy day. A lot of times it was a scenario where someone lost their job and they really had no plan, to how can they stay afloat. So what I learn and what I teach the clients is that there are insurances you can kind of put in place in the case that you do lose your job. Then there's mortgage insurance and different things that can be placed um, on the mortgage, or on you personally, such that that will cover you in the case you lose your job.
Awesome, and that's actually probably information a lot of people probably need to hear right now because of the pandemic. I
Absolutely.
know a lot of people been in a tough spot. Landlords and just regular home primary homeowners in a tough spot when it comes to that. So everybody's looking for some type of relief until everything dies down. So, oof, yeah, that was a good one actually. So I'm actually looking into that myself because I would like to be more educated. Because for situations like this, unfortunately, right? Sometimes it takes a bad scenario for
Right.
somebody to benefit on their back end. Like, hey, this was my experience that I went through. I don't want you to go through this. So I would say for future reference, these are the things you need to do.
Yeah, yeah, it's very important to be educated when you are, purchasing a home. And that's what I like to do with my clients, to educate them as they're, even when they're selling their home, but selling and purchasing, all the things that I learned, even ways to, pay down your mortgage. You take a 30-year loan, but, there are some ways to kind of pay that mortgage down so that you're not stuck for 30 years with a mortgage. You're actually paying money, a little bit extra money towards principal, to pay it down a little quicker.
Yeah.
So those sorts of things are like important to me because of what I experienced again during my tenure as on the foreclosure end. I learned different things that would have helped a lot of people if they knew, um, these small little tidbits. So
I tell people usually, if they when they ask about paying their mortgage down, to look at their amortization table. Usually, you
Absolutely.
get it in the mail, so you can look and see. All right, this is how much going towards principal. This is how much going towards interest. And then I know like some calculators I've seen where if you pay, you look at the how much is going towards principal that month, you just pay extra the same amount of that principal, and you would have paid off an extra month of your mortgage. So that's one thing I've seen people do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like, when you're paying a mortgage, you're thinking about, well, I'm I have just enough to pay my bills, my mortgage, my bills. But you don't realize, like, once you actually sign for your mortgage and you start to, you know, cook and eat in and
Yeah.
start to plan to pay this mortgage, you realize you actually do a lot of times have enough to even now save. Because you're kind of reorganizing your life. Like, once you decide to purchase a property, that's the a lot of times the point in your life where you're like, okay, let me get myself together and like really look to see what I'm spending my money on. And once you start doing that and writing everything down, you realize that you can not only afford a house, but you can afford to save, put extra money towards principal, and just seeking out ways to make maybe even some extra income so you can kind of pay down that mortgage and stay afloat.
And so a good rule of thumb that I started living by because of Dave Ramsey was not to have a rent or mortgage that was more than 25% of my monthly income. And so
Absolutely.
I felt like that was a good rule of thumb because anything more than that, then you start to kind of feel a pinch because you still got your utilities as
Right.
well. So
Yeah,
you don't want to be house broke, as he'll
absolutely.
say.
100%. 100%.
So what's your role when it comes to you being the closing attorney? I only, like I said when I was telling you earlier before we started recording, I've only seen it when I talk to her. Usually as a female, we talk for a little bit. I sign papers, but there's hundreds and hundreds of pieces of paper. So I know there's more than just me. We smile. Me and you smiling at each other. We sign, and then everybody's happy. So if you could break down that role, I'd be appreciated.
Yeah. So in the New York market, the role of a real estate attorney is to ensure you're legally protected when you're purchasing a home. So is this dedicated to New York or to everywhere?
Everywhere.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So I'm a New York attorney, so I can talk about that. Some states, a attorney is not even required when you purchase a home. The realtors, a lot of times, prepare the contract and explain it to the clients. There's a title company that's involved, but
Hmm.
in New York and where I am, my role is to ensure you're legally protected. So the seller's attorney prepares the contract and sends it over to me. I review the contract with my client and I send that contract out to the seller's attorney once it's signed by my client. At that time, the buyer then prepares a down payment check. They either go to the bank and get a certified check or just write a personal check. They can also wire their down payment. And then the seller signs. Once the seller signs, my role then changes to now I review title. So I order a title report and I make sure that there are no judgments, no liens on the home. I also make sure that, my clients don't have anything against them that's going to affect them from purchasing a home with the mortgage company.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so that's my role. I then review title. And then my role after title is cleared is then to ensure that they understand what they're signing at the closing table. So I then work with the mortgage company. The mortgage company comes with a ton of documents, like you said, a lot of papers, right? So
Yeah.
mortgage company comes with all the paperwork that will need to be signed, the note, the mortgage, affidavits, um, the amortization schedule that you mentioned. So I explain all those documents to the client, to my buyer at the closing table, along with the title affidavit. So there are some things that you have to, state, hey, I have no judgments, I have no liens, I have, my if I have a current mortgage, it's not in default, things like that. So I explain to them like the legal ramifications of what they're signing. So that's my role as the real estate attorney. And just to make them feel as secure and comfortable as possible when you're buying and selling a home, like you have support, you have a team that's there to, help you. You're not there alone, just like blindly signing what they say your life away,
Yes.
but you have someone that can actually explain what you're signing and that's been through the process themselves.
And
So that
so, something to clarify, maybe you could break it down a little bit more. So, just because, let's say, I put down 25%, I can
Mhm.
still add another person to the title on signing on closing day, correct?
So are we referring to, if you're taking a mortgage? Because if you're taking a mortgage, the person that's on the mortgage is the same person that's on the deed in the state
Gotcha.
of New York.
Gotcha.
In
Okay.
the
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So if you're taking a mortgage, now if you're purchasing the home all cash, then you can put, whoever you like on your deed. But if you're purchasing utilizing a mortgage, then the persons that are on the mortgage are the same persons that are on the deed. Now the note is different. The note is the party that's actually owes the debt. So you can be on the note and owe the money to the bank, but you and I can be on the mortgage as the parties that will be what they call entitled. So that's how it works in New York. I can only speak to New York as a real estate attorney licensed in the state of New York.
Understandable. And it sounds similar to how it works down here in Virginia as well. I just know that was a few questions that I was being asked about, and I was like, hey, I can't speak for, like you said, I can't speak for every state. I only
Yeah,
can speak for my circumstances unless I actually like research it. But I
yeah.
wanted to know too, because I actually, got introduced to you through Kevin, and so I'm assuming that y'all work together on certain transactions. And so how does that work with between the relationship between a real estate agent, the title company, and then the attorney? Is a lot of it just, hey, Crystal, I got this guy, a person coming that needs to close on a home. I would like to use you, or is it he just likes to go through the title company? How does that connection work to where everybody kind of knows each other and is able to kind of benefit from each other collectively?
Yeah, definitely. So, how it works in the New York market with the real estate agent. So, Kevin Grimes is an amazing, amazing real estate agent that represents buyers and sellers in New York. So he then will have a client. He tells the client, hey, you need a team. Sometimes, when you're going to purchase your home, you don't realize kind of what it takes and who you need in place when you're purchasing a home. You just know, okay, I want to purchase. And maybe they'll start with Kevin. They'll say to Kevin, hey, I want to buy a home. Kevin will first tell them, hey, you need a pre approval. So you know how much you qualify for before we go out. So he's going to ask them, hey, do you have a mortgage lender? If they don't have a mortgage lender, he may say, okay, well, I have, three people that I like to refer you to. And then, you do your own due diligence. And that's what happens as it relates to the attorney, the home inspector, so a lot of our clients, they have maybe an attorney. They'll ask a friend or family member and say, hey, I know you just bought a house. Do you have an attorney? Who's the attorney that represented you? Were they good? Okay, yes, I would like to use that attorney. But when it comes to the real estate agent is a lot of times the referral source, also the mortgage company, because you want to know if you even qualify for a mortgage. So
Yes.
for the real estate attorney, that's a great source of our referral source. They're great as referral sources for real estate attorneys because they have direct contact with the buyer kind of like right from the start. Again, the mortgage lender, you're issuing a pre-approval. So once you have a pre-approval, that mortgage lender may say, hey, and I have an attorney for you. Same with Kevin as a realtor. Hey, I have an attorney for you. And that's kind of where I come into play. So we all
Awesome.
work together. A lot of realtors, attorneys, we have like our team that we work with. Like I know if a buyer, someone came to me and said, "Hey, I want to purchase a home." I know that I have a collective group of realtors, mortgage professionals, and we want to kind of link them to people on the team, people
Yeah.
that you know and trust, and you have their cell phone number and you're able to kind of reach out, and they'll be great with your client because, of course, your referral sources are a reflection on you.
This is true. This
You
is
know that, right? Exactly.
yeah, like, well, you sent me over to this guy.
Yeah,
Oh.
exactly, exactly. Never want that to happen.
Exactly. So
Yes.
I saw in your bio that you've also dealt with the firm. I don't know if it was you specifically representing landlords, homeowners. And
Yes.
so, what advice do you have? Because I've been to court. Well, my property manager been to court about maybe 4 times in the lifetime of me being a landlord. What advice would you give to landlords when it comes to when you represent them at like certain things you've noticed that they did wrong or did right that helped in their favor, or maybe some things that they were doing that you was like, yeah, that's not really you being a good landlord, and the tenant, it was in a tenant's favor.
It's so like in preparation for court or just like in general, like if you're a
So
landlord, these are the things you should do.
so in preparation for court, for sure, I'm glad you
Yes.
made it more specific, and then we'll go
Mhm.
into the general aspect.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So the most important thing as a landlord, if you're looking to maybe evict your client or maybe sue them for, the non-payment, the first thing you must have adequate notice. So there are requirements depending how long your tenant has been in the property, how many days notice you have to provide to your tenant. So it could be 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, depending on how long they've resided in your property. So notice is number one. Second, you want to make sure you document everything. So if your tenant is paying, say, by cash, you want to make sure you're giving them a receipt. So if you have to go in front of the judge, you can prove what payments were missed, what payments were, when things were paid. Your records aren't kind of all over the place where, you're coming to court with just like, you know, a bag full of just like post-it notes, just
Yeah.
like, hey, your honor, these are the late payments. It just doesn't even kind of look right. The judge is going to say, well, you're not even keeping accurate records. So how can I make a decision based on what you've provided? So
Yes.
everything should be documented in writing. If there's any agreements as to, if something needs to be fixed, um, you want to document the day in which you received the call and the day in which you now have made the repair. So again, everything in writing. Proper notices should be sent to the tenant when things aren't being done as planned, again, when payments aren't made and things like that.
And
Mhm.
then when you've tell me some of your experiences sitting in court with your clients, some things that you noticed that you're like, if I was a landlord, I would have did it this way.
Yeah. So when I'm sitting in court and when I'm with my landlord, right? So just having, again, like how I mentioned, all your documentation must be in order for sure. Because, I've had a lot of scenarios where the landlord has said, he hasn't paid in, you know, 5 months, let's say.
Hmm.
And then the tenant comes to court and the tenant has like all this documentation just showing the payments that were made. And I'm like, what do you mean? You have the payments and like show me the bank accounts. He's like, and it's just you have to be very organized as a landlord. You have to have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed because your tenant, a lot of times the tenant know the rules and the
Yeah.
tenant know yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right? So and we know this, so that's why a lot of people are fearful for being landlords because they know that the tenant, will come and ensure that they're in that property without making payments for the next 2 years and make your life a living, you know what. So you just want to make sure that, again, everything's documented and that you really know what you're doing. You want to make sure you know what the laws are and when the laws change, because
Yeah.
um, at the right before the pandemic started, they changed some of the laws as it relates to notice. Um, Initially, and for many years, you could serve a tenant with 30 days notice if you wanted to evict them for non-payment. And over time, that changed depending on how long the tenant had resided within the property. So it was like, okay, it was 30 days if the tenant had been there for a year or less. And then, if it was 2 years, it was 60 days, and 3+ years, 90 days. So a lot of landlords didn't know that change. So it's important as a landlord to just keep yourself in the know as to
Yeah.
when laws have changed, and make sure you have a good real estate attorney on your team to keep you updated if you have any questions.
For us, it was we could not evict them based off of a COVID related situation. So the tenant's going to say, I lost my job because of
Of
COVID.
course.
But what we could do is I don't have to renew my lease. And so that's basically what we've been doing. I was explaining to Kevin a couple of episodes ago with one of the tenants. What I did was I helped her sign up for a rent relief program, and it took
Mhm.
care of 4 months worth of rent. And within those 4 months, I used that time as we'll say, a litmus test to see if she was going to get a job while she was living there for free, and my
Right,
mortgage is taken care of, and she didn't. So I was like, all
right,
right, her release is up in March. Go ahead and put the notice in. You got that leeway, thanks to COVID. You had the moratorium, couldn't really do anything. I hope you
right,
signed up for this relief program so I could still get taken care of. And then you still didn't really get a job. So yeah, you got to go. So that's kind of how we're working. And I know people like probably banging themselves over the head, anybody that did anything more than a 12-month lease, because this kind
right.
of started back in March. And some
Yes,
of my tenants, that's when they got their leases were in March, income
right.
tax time frame.
Of course.
So I feel bad for any landlord that did like 36 months, 24
Right,
month
right, right.
leases.
Never a good decision. Yeah,
And so down here we do that a lot because it's military. It's a lot of
yeah.
military.
Okay, that makes
So we
sense.
just lease them out until they PCS.
Mhm.
But other if they were not, I wouldn't advise it.
Of course not. Yeah, there's always, certain scenarios where you just have to make that judgment call and that business decision. But ideally, you would renew their lease, once a year, so that, if things change, you want to put a new tenant in there, you're able to do so.
Oh, and so I forgot to mention too. So the one thing that I would do to get people to sign more than 1 year, I guess this is once COVID goes down, and this was pre-COVID, I would take off $100 off the first month's rent, and then $100 or $200 off the last month's rent to get them locked in for a longer period of time. If I thought that they were a consistent tenant, and
Yeah,
so instant gratification on the front and back end, because you're thinking as a landlord, you're thinking long ball. I got you for 18 or 24 months. That's 18, 24 months. I don't have to worry about, the mortgage and, obviously some type of cash flow.
right. And that actually brings up a good point too, and makes me think about when we say put everything in writing, that's also when it comes to the lease. A lot of, I've had a lot of scenarios where the landlord generated their own lease, which is 100% fine. It's not no requirement for a attorney to prepare your lease on your behalf, but they've generated a lease that, maybe they found online, so it didn't contain all the provisions that they actually wanted in the lease.
Yeah.
So now they want to, appear in court and sue based on that lease, but that lease doesn't have the provision that's required to now even start a lawsuit.
Yep.
Oh, I told them that they had to do X, but okay, provide me with a copy of the lease. And when I look in the lease, there's nothing that even states that within the lease. So therefore, it's an oral agreement, and we know what happens with oral agreements
Yeah,
in
they never
court
happened.
of law. Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
I'm
So
glad you brought that up too, because when it does come to leases, I've had to refer back to that a lot
yes,
to remind myself
right,
what I need to do, or to remind the tenant, hey, these are the things you were supposed to be doing.
right.
And there's no such thing as going too far into detail in a lease, as far as what I've
Absolutely.
learned. Because
100%.
when I came to trying to charge one of my tenants for early termination fee, my
Yes.
lease, this is what I get for dealing with my first property, man. It was so vague. It said, if the member cuts their lease early, the the fee will be negotiated between the landlord and the tenant. That's all it said. And so that's free range to be for us to settle
Yeah,
at $900
of
versus the
course.
3,000 I'm supposed to get.
Right.
So immediately after that, I said, "Hey, we need an addendum. I want all tenants to sign. This is what the fee will be. I think it's 2 months is the most I'm able to do down here, 2 or 3
Yeah,
months."
that makes sense.
And then that was the law from there on. And so sometimes you gotta learn from
Right.
certain situations. But anybody that's got any leases like that, look it up and make sure your early termination fee is very
Right.
descriptive on what, because that makes that tenant think twice. Like, I'm not trying to pay $3,200. I'll just wing it out until the end of the lease.
Right.
Or this is very vague, because you mentioned something earlier. These tenants know all the rules,
Oh,
and it's so
100%.
interesting how they put so much energy into trying to figure out ways not to pay,
Yeah.
or and know all the
Right.
rules
Yep.
and loopholes versus taking the time to make sure that everything's taken care of. So I always think that's so funny,
Right.
because they have no problem battling. It's like, where was all this energy, and how do you have
Yeah.
the money to get a lawyer? Like,
Right.
what the heck?
100%. Yeah. They're planning. Yep. That's the truth.
So I have a particular situation, and maybe this will apply to a lot of people, where I have a lawyer. She offered to offer me a flat rate to
Mhm.
go after somebody for rent versus an hourly rate. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So most real estate attorneys in the state of New York charge a flat rate when it comes to a residential transaction. There are some attorneys that charge an hourly rate, which is perfectly fine if
Yeah.
there's a client that will pay it. But a real estate transaction, there's a lot of communication, kind of like back and forth. So to document the time it would take to kind of be on the phone, and maybe the client feeling kind of rushed, if they have questions because, they're being charged hourly.
Yeah.
Um, that just wouldn't be ideal. A, it's really the biggest purchase of your life. So if you have questions and, you need information, that's kind of something you want to be able to reach out to your real estate attorney, or just to get those questions answered without feeling like, this is a billable call. So so yeah, definitely a flat rate is really what, I think a lot of the buyers look for when they're looking for a real estate attorney. And it's really what we how we set up our fee structure really in the state of New York when it comes to a residential real estate transaction. At
And
least.
so, yeah, yeah. And so when it comes to, all right, let's say I want to go after rent, and then I want to start garnishing this old tenant's paycheck. Can you break down that process? And then is it easy or is it hard for that to happen? As far as the landlord getting their money back from the garnishments, how you're able to track these people down, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's so it's interesting. When you go to court, and the court now issues a judgment against the tenant, you now have to take another step. So it's not like, you go to court and the court makes a decision like, okay, you owe 2 months rent and now you have to vacate by X date. It's still another process. And the process is to have, like you said, wage garnishment, or to put a lien, now file that lien against the actual individual. Um, that's a process. It's
I'm glad you
sometimes,
mentioned that part too.
yeah, it's sometimes a lengthy process because what you first have to do is get their, find out their whereabouts. So now you've essentially kicked them out of your home, you've evicted them. And now you're like, okay, well, where are you going? And finding that information out, because every judgment has to be attached to not just the person, but like to a address, and they have to be now served with the judgment paperwork. And then they also have to that you also have to know who they're employed with, their employer. So going back to being a landlord, that's very important to when you're kind of vetting the tenants. Part of that vetting process, I believe you should have a application that contains like family members contact information, so you can kind of, in the case you need to kind of reach out or figure it out, maybe then you have, some, you know information, emergency contact information.
There you go.
Yeah, emergency contact information where you can kind of maybe reach out and find out their whereabouts. Of course, you want their employment information because you're just going to want that anyway when you're looking to see if this is a good tenant. Um, and now utilizing that employment information to now garnish those wages, and you have to do that most times through a company. And so you have to take into account that that company is going to charge. So is the judgment worth it? If we're talking maybe $3,000 in back rent, now the cost to now locate the tenant, the cost to hire a company to now garnish those wages or to find out who the employer is and take those steps, I don't know, sometimes it's not even worth it.
I
What
know,
is
and
your
that's
experience
the
been?
say again.
Have you had to garnish wages, and have you been through that process?
So that's the process I'm in the middle in right now.
Mhm.
Back about 6 grand, I would say.
Okay.
And so she offered me 855 flat rate. So I'm like, okay, I'm assuming there's no other extra fees after that. If I'm paying 855 to get about 6 grand, that makes sense to me. And then after that is taken care of, 3 to 6 months will be the garnishment process to get everything back. I've been told like a lot of times though, when it comes to certain settlements or even garnishments, maybe sometimes you don't get all the money back, but it's better than nothing. Because I've heard people out of spikes quit their jobs and then you don't get anything. But I'm glad you brought up the lien part because I have heard of good stories where you put a lien on people on like their homes,
Mhm.
certain things that they own, and they can't sell that until they pay you
Right.
back.
Of course.
So,
100%.
and I would like to see somebody abandon their house just to not pay a $5,000 lien. I
Right.
mean,
Exactly. 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 And so, but a lot of times we're talking about a tenant. And so your tenant has now, unless they went to go buy a house, most times
yeah,
they don't have a house that they can attach that lien to. So, there's been situations though where, that lien was now later attached to a house. Like it was now discovered that, hey, they have bought a house. And now that lien was attached to the house. And now when they sell the house, hopefully in the next maybe
four or
10
five
years,
years.
30 years, then maybe then at that point you get, your $6,000,
Yeah,
judgment
yeah. Just give it
back.
to me after close at closing.
Yeah, exactly, exactly, exactly. So, and that happens a lot. I see that representing buyers and sellers. Those liens are, of course, credit card liens, now traffic tickets, even red light tickets are now being
Wow.
made judgments. And they have to be now paid at closing. So, it's interesting sometimes to see when I'm representing a seller, just some of the liens that come up, and they're like, oh, that's from like 20 something years ago, or and that, that's there is a statute of limitations, however, on some judgments. So so a lot of times, if they're over maybe 10 years, they are now deemed expired, but sometimes they still have to pay them, and the person that put the lien against them is no longer here. So, it just becomes a disaster. So this the lesson in all of this is just to pay your bills. That's
Yes.
really it.
So you made a good point. So a lot of the tenants will not have a house at that point. What else can you put a lien on? Or what else have you seen people put a lien on?
Yeah, really only homes. Really only homes. You can put a lien, liens follow the person, but they're usually attached to a property address. So I've seen liens on a person at a address, and is it them? I don't know, And so because what's interesting, say when you're selling your property, there we when you're buying or selling, there's a title report, and the title report pulls liens according to the name. So sometimes I'm going through the liens with my clients and I'm like, have you ever lived at this address or that address? And they're like, no, it's not me. And sometimes you're like, sure that's not you? You sure it's not you? And like you can kind of tell, like, but it's attached to like an address that is not the address they're selling. So so that comes up a lot. That comes up a lot. So you can attach a judgment to a person by way of a address, as long as there is a address associated with them. Sometimes it's not particularly their address,
And so
but
yeah, I
it
see
may
there's
be
a
where they're currently living, like a family member's address,
yeah family, and that's where that emergency contact comes from. So that was something I just learned just now as a good reference if God forbid you're trying to chase down a tenant after the fact. But it all does start with the vetting process.
Yes.
Me and Kevin were also talking about before we will get a tenant and we're vetting them, go to the place where they live currently, and looking, seeing how they live and take care of the property that they're currently at, and make that decision. Shoot, even talk to the other that landlord if they happen to be renting. Talk to the landlord and ask for their rent rolls. See
Yes.
if they've been paying rent, stuff like that. Because everybody's gonna have a sob or a particular situation. We didn't
Yes,
get
of
along.
course.
Something
Yeah.
happened.
Yes.
I get a lot of, especially nowadays. When I get these referrals, a lot of people talk about how they had a judgment, but it wasn't their fault. And I'm just like, how does I don't know situations where you could have a judgment against you and it's not your fault.
No, no, not at all. I don't either. So
Okay.
don't look to me
Because I
to
hear it so
explain
often,
that.
I'm just like, well, maybe I'm
Yeah.
missing something. Maybe these things happen to people. Because to be honest with you, I always feel like as the landlord, I'm the one fighting my case a lot of times
Right.
because maybe the idea or the stigma of slumlords is still around. So I always feel like I have to prove myself. So when people send me messages saying, I got a judgment against me, it wasn't fair, I'm just like, well, usually it's like the landlord fighting the battle. So
Right. Of
I
course.
usually, yeah. So even though Virginia is a very landlord supportive state, though, I every time I've had to go to court, a judge I feel like has been fair to the
Wow.
tenant, and fair to the tenant and to me actually.
Mhm.
Yeah, do I want to wait another 30 days to deal with this individual? No, but it gives that time for a reset button for everybody to act accordingly, and then you'll see what happens from there. So because
Yeah.
I had one tenant that was had to pay escrow. I think she was using her tenant assertion, and so she was putting money in escrow, and we handled all the repairs, but she stopped putting money in escrow. So when we went back to court,
Got
that's
it.
when he was just like, "Hey, landlord handle everything. You stop putting money in escrow, you got to go." So yeah, and that's the only other situations where I've been able to have tenants get out before the lease during this rent moratorium is if they do something like a tenant assertion and go to court, that the judge has been kicking them out if they're not paying rent in those situations, if they amplify it, but they got to initiate it. It's weird. Like they have to initiate it and make a big issue out of it. If I'm
Right.
showing what I'm supposed to be doing and they're not putting money in escrow, then
Right.
the judge can say, all right, go. Uh, but I feel for a lot of landlords because it's if you didn't have money for a rainy day or you
Mhm.
didn't vet a particular type of
Absolutely.
tenant,
Yeah.
I can imagine how it's been really hard. And I don't understand why they keep extending the moratorium. I
Right.
just don't understand the economics behind it because I don't know anybody that has 18 months worth of reserve for
Right.
vacancy.
Of course. Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. It's crazy. I do feel for the tenants that are suffering in this pandemic for sure, and anyone that's suffering during this pandemic. It's hard. You know, they don't I mean, from one aspect, it's like it's just, to live in someone's house kind of rent free without any kind of recourse. It just sounds a bit absurd. But then on the other end, now you evict someone, where are they going, and so the shelters are already inundated with people that have maybe lost their job or been you know put out on the street. So I think, yeah, it's just a difficult situation from both ends. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I'm not an economist, but my thought process would be I completely understand do not kick people out because you'll spread COVID more. I mean, and you'll be displacing 40 million people.
Right.
So, like I said, I'm not an economist. So, what I might be saying, economists may be like, well, that's not how it works.
Right.
But when you send the stimulus checks, or when you had the funding for some type of stimulus, do it to where you keep people from not being kicked out. So, the $600 or the $1,200 people were getting, send it straight to the real estate agencies that cover the rental properties or or that individual landlord. Because I
Right.
would think that the priority I'm thinking is making sure people don't get displaced,
Yes.
for then food and then everything else.
Right.
But if you give somebody a $600, there's
Right.
nothing obligating them to pay their rent for that month. It
Right.
just it goes back into the economy and people will spend it,
Right.
but it doesn't help. I don't think it helps the best with maintaining order because here's the thing: after all this is said and done, well, currently people are foreclosing and going bankrupt. But when the fallout happens, me and Kevin go back and forth about this all the time. I think there's a particular fallout where, okay, granted, we're not kicking out any tenants,
Right.
but you have a lot of landlords that are foreclosing. So where are the tenants going? Because if I'm going to buy a new home from a foreclosure, I'm not
Right.
keeping those tenants that ain't been paying rent. So now
Right.
they're displaced anyways. That's how I kind of look at it. So
Yeah, no, yeah, it's again, it's such a difficult kind of time we're in that you really don't know what, rhyme or reason. You really don't know what the best thing to do is. So I I have nothing to contribute to that. This is
it's
this
it
is this is where we are, so
yeah.
and unfortunately, we're not in the position to make, the choices. So
And I ain't saying my choices would be the best. It's just my
yeah,
opinion on it. I kind of like to go about back and forth about it, but
yeah,
uh all in all, what is your rich state of mind? Why do you do what you do every day? I noticed that you're busy, you're a hard worker, and you've been doing this for years. And so with that is a special type of drive and passion that I noticed. So if you could please explain that.
yeah, definitely. So, kind of as I mentioned right from the start, is that I worked in foreclosure for years, and just seeing what happened to people as they overextended themselves, or entered into adjustable rate mortgages, and then when that time came for that rate to kind of increase, they could no longer make those payments. So I feel like my role is to ensure that what happened then doesn't happen now, as much as I can. So my role is really to like educate and just see, everyone just kind of buy homes, generate that generational wealth, um, to ensure they're knowledgeable of, the things that are in place to ensure they can actually pay their mortgage, to ensure that they're getting the proper insurance if something, were to happen, if they were to lose their job. So my rich state of mind, what keeps me motivated is just seeing people winning and seeing people prosper, and really living their best lives. And that definitely that's through investing and purchasing homes, and definitely um, being in a place where they can live a fulfilled life.
So I feel like I'm inadvertently building a team in New York because Kevin, I've talked to Kevin, he's a real estate agent. You're, real estate attorney.
That's all.
Uh,
Yeah, no, that's great.
yeah,
Awesome.
Mira and I, we're actually from New York, and
Okay.
but the market is so expensive out there, and but I can appreciate it though because I feel like speaking of appreciation, the appreciation really goes up in that area, especially if you can hit it uh really like Harlem. If you bought Harlem maybe 10,
Yeah.
15 years,
Oh, for sure.
right? I'd be a million multi-millionaire.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so
Absolutely. But that's happening in pocket neighborhoods. It's happening all over, the United States. So you just have to kind of do your research and see, what the trends are. So, if you can, do it where you are in Virginia, then I know anyone can do it anywhere they are. So it doesn't matter, if you're in New York or Virginia or anywhere else. You just watch the trends and you see what's happening, and you can use New York, like you said, Harlem, as an example of that, and see what happened there and kind of mirror that wherever you are.
well, I appreciate your time, Crystal. Like you gave a wealth
Absolutely.
of information because I
Appreciate.
needed to hear that. I'm pretty sure other people needed to hear that. I like it when you get information that you didn't know you needed until you
Yeah,
heard it.
that's awesome.
So yeah, it's
Love
always awesome. So thank you
it.
for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.